If you live in the real world, you want to hear what Dr. Bruce Rubenstein has to say.
If you live in the spiritual world, you will want to hear what Rabbi Shea Hecht has to say.
We may agree,
And we may disagree.
but you want to hear both views.
So let's get right to it.
Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. You know, Dr. Bruce, there are two words that people throw around constantly. And I myself sometimes wonder, what is the difference between these two words? Sympathy and empathy. And something tells me that they're very, very different. Yet it's something very important. And as we talk about this, one of the things I'm hoping that we'll talk about today is that something that's inborn? Do you have to have it or you don't? Can I learn sympathy? Can I learn how to be and have empathy? And what is the purpose of my sympathy and my empathy? So that's the discussion for today.
$1 million question. $1 million question. And by the way, $1 million socks. I love Snoopy.
Okay.
Thank you very much for wearing those.
And for those who want to know where you can get these socks,
You should plug the place where you get your
have
socks.
sympathy for my socks.
Absolutely.
Okay. We don't believe in empathy for my socks. That would be the wrong thing.
We clearly distinguish between sympathy and empathy, at least in the field of psychology, but I think you'll find this in any dictionary. Sympathy is when we feel something for someone else, but we have not necessarily gone through that experience. Empathy implies that you know what the other person is feeling because you have felt that yourself. So, for example, if you have, lost a parent, you know what that feeling of loss feels like, and there's another individual who just lost their parent, you will have empathy for that person. But someone, for example, breaks their leg and they're in a lot of pain, but you've never had a fracture or broken anything, you can have tremendous sympathy for them. It's not necessarily, empathy doesn't necessarily imply that you have that you're feeling more intensely for them. It just has to do with how much you can relate to the experience.
You know, your example of losing a parent, God forbid, and all those who are blessed, you have your parents till 120 and beyond, is, I'll tell you a nice story.
Tell me.
I'm standing on 48th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan with my brother Shimon, Rabbi Shimon. We're standing at the corner, red light, don't walk. Someone comes right inside of me and says, "Hey, Rabbi, how are you doing?" I said, "Oh, okay. How are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I just lost my mother a few months ago, and we have a little exchange. How long does it take till the light changes? The light changes, we take off." I turned to my brother. I said, "I don't know who that guy is." He says, "Boy, you really fooled me. You had such empathy for him. I thought you really felt for him." I said, "I had empathy for what he talked about. He lost a parent. I know what it means to lose a parent. I was able to have empathy for the loss." Of course, it came back to me later who he was, but this is very interesting that you say. Empathy is I went through something similar, and therefore I'm able to feel for you. Right. Sympathy is, no, I feel for you. I don't know what you went through.
Well, I never had the same personal experience, but I can identify, for example, with your anyone can identify with suffering and pain in a general sense, right? Or difficult times.
I want to start with something which I think is very, very important, and I tell this to my colleagues, particularly to my students who go into the field of either rabbinics or therapy. The worst thing to do is false sympathy or false empathy. And I'm just wondering what you can say about that.
I guess what I'm wondering is, I don't like usually answering a question with another question, but what do you mean by false sympathy?
I think when we express sympathy, as you know, when we were talking about setting up this show, you can't teach somebody to have sympathy or empathy.
Correct.
But the question is, so therefore, by saying that I feel for you and you don't really feel for me, that's worse than anything.
It's certainly disingenuous. Yeah, right? Yeah.
And a disingenuous, sympathetic or empathetic expression can be worse than not saying anything. Because we know the power. Look, today we talk about validation. So many people come into your office, and all they really want is validation. They come to the rabbi. All they want is validation, right? They just want to hear, the rabbi said, I did the right thing. In fact, I'll get the call later. The wife will call me and says, did you tell my husband he did the right thing? Did you tell my wife she did the right thing? And I say, well, let's try to, maybe you also did the right thing, etc. So, but validation is something very strong. And sometimes by giving the person a little bit of sympathy, we validate them. But if you don't really have it, I'm not sure this is something that you want to try to fake it until you make it.
True, which is why it's a problem for some people who don't innately have the capacity to have sympathy or empathy for someone. Let's use an example. We don't really use this term anymore, but something called Asperger's syndrome, right? Something along with the autistic spectrum. And they would define it differently, that they don't pick up on other people's cues. But if you actually sit with an individual like that and you expose them to an experience that most people would feel sympathy for, they like have no reaction. But if you speak to them, they will tell you that over time they learn what people will feel in given situations and then have a response to it. There is a difference between validation and sympathy and empathy. I mean, sympathy and empathy necessarily imply that you are feeling, maybe not to the whole extent, but you are feeling to some extent what the other person is feeling. There are individuals even farther out on the spectrum who do not have a capacity to have empathy or sympathy at all. We usually refer to them as antisocial or psychopathic. What's frightening about that is that it appears to have a very strong genetic component. You know, when you find children who can do things which most people would feel guilty about, or they're exposed to situations where most people would feel some kind of sympathy or empathy for, they feel absolutely nothing. But they are definitely the outliers. The question that's come up, can you teach someone to be sympathetic and empathic?
Or is it a gift from God? Sympathy. I have sympathy. And in my case, I think God blessed me with a tremendous amount of sympathy. When a person tells, they unravel their story before me in my office, it's not a second nature at all. I can really feel for them. And in most cases, because at my age, you went through so many things and so many parts of life, I can say even empathy sometimes comes automatic. But let's even talk about, being that I spoke about myself, how much should I thank God, or is it a muscle that I developed?
Well, I think we certainly can develop it, but I do think at its core, look, there's a continuum. Some people are more empathic or sympathetic than others, right? I also think that there are certain roles in life for which there is an advantage if you are not too sympathetic or empathic. Yes?
I think this is a question that probably people ask if they want to become a therapist. I suppose they have to sit down with their professor or their dean in school and say, listen, I do have sympathy. I don't have sympathy. Should I become a therapist? Should I not become a therapist? Is it important to be a good therapist?
It's exigent, obviously, to have some degree of sympathy or empathy if you're a therapist. But I think that it's also exigent in many other fields. I think teachers need to have that capacity. Parents need to have that capacity. But I don't think it's something that you can teach. I do think it is that if you are blessed with a big amount of sympathy or a huge capacity to experience sympathy or empathy, I do think that really is a gift from above, and not something that you can acquire if you simply don't have it at all. I do think it's possible to be able to identify what other people are feeling and learn appropriate responses, even if you don't feel it. And I think that that's helpful for other people as well. But specifically talking about sympathy and empathy, they are not learned qualities.
The Talmud speaks of, in the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, loving another Jew, and speaks about, can you feel someone else's pain? Can you feel sorry for someone versus can you feel somebody's joy? Can you be happy for someone? And I've always found, it's easy. God forbid you see someone with a broken leg walking on crutches. It's very easy to have a certain level of sympathy or maybe even empathy. But find out that your next door neighbor won the lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Are you going to be dancing and say, I'm so happy for Yankala who won the lottery? Am I so happy for, Chanala who got a new car, my next door neighbor, when she pulls out of her driveway?
Are you? You neighbor didn't win the lottery is what you're going to tell me, right?
No, I'm going to say I struggle with, and the Talmud speaks of it, that it's a level of Avos Yisrael. To feel for someone's joy is much more difficult. Feel someone's pain. I was blessed to be able to feel someone's pain. Feel someone's joy. And I'm not sure if I agree with you. You're saying that I think it is something you have to work on from a spiritual level, and understand. There's different things within your spiritual travels that you can feel. Number one is the obligation, the actual mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, feeling for another person.
Okay, well, let me clarify something. I don't believe you can learn empathy or sympathy, but I think you can develop it, right? You could be a very sympathetic or empathic person, but if you're completely preoccupied with yourself and what's going on in your life, what you could potentially perceive in someone, you won't be perceiving because you're simply preoccupied. Point about that you were making about the Talmud, it's not just limited to that area. The fact is that for whatever reason, we are far more attuned to negative, toxic, painful stimuli than we are to positive stimuli. That's true for everyone. We will notice, look at the news. What do they show you to catch your attention? They're always terrible, negative things. There's something about our makeup that draws our attention more than these more positive, joyous things. You agree?
So you're saying simply a natural response to something sad, it's going to evoke within us a greater response than something happy.
It's going to attract something negative has more propensity to attract our attention than something positive. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right. The question is, and again, talking from the Talmudic perspective of
also you all with your 40 years of experience as well, no?
Yeah, but I still, on a personal level, would really like to feel for someone's joy, for someone's simcha. When I go to a simcha, and I think sometimes it's just verbalizing, saying to the person, I'm really happy for you. I'm really joyful for you. And then you'll create that feeling will follow.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a paucity of that relative to the amount of criticism or negative or sympathy for things that are going wrong. Yeah. People that are suffering or in pain. But you pose a very interesting question, why something joyous doesn't evoke that same level of joy in us when the stimulus is negative in another individual, that immediately evokes it in us.
If you look at it from a biblical perspective, I think it's one of the things that we also have a difficulty. Jealousy. I'm not going to be jealous of your pain, but of your joy, You won the lottery ticket. I may be jealous that you just got a new car or you just went on a cruise, and therefore it's going to be a little bit more distant to me when, God forbid, someone tells me that their car was just broken into. I'm not going to feel jealous, so it's easier to feel.
No, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I actually never thought about that before, that the feeling or being sympathetic or empathic for someone's joy has the ability also to arouse envy, which is extremely destructive. Excellent point. I never considered that before.
And something that we have to work on very hard, I believe, the fact that it's in one of the 10 Commandments, envy is a struggle. I know for myself, it's a struggle. And being happy for someone automatically, I think, is one of the ways we actually conquer not being envious.
And perhaps raise the level of our capacity for sympathy and empathy to its highest level.
Okay, so on a practical level, we can give people advice by simply expressing joy for somebody's happy thing. That will help you have feelings for them. And God forbid, in the negative, when we hear negative news for someone that we know, or sometimes even when we don't know, to have a little bit of a feeling for that. And remember, as you said, part of it is a gift from God. And I think recognizing that it's a gift from God helps us develop it as well and use it and express it.
Everything in proportion. I've seen certainly cases of excessive sympathy and empathy, particularly on the part of parents, where every little tiny thing that happens, even in a small baby falls down as they're trying to start walking and they start crying a little bit, and the parent then gives excessive sympathy, oh, you poor thing, and coddles, and as opposed to letting the child learn how to sort of get over that, him or herself. So obviously everything in its proper amount, both for those things that happen for which we need to be sympathetic or empathic that are negative, as well as those things that are positive. You're reminding me, by the way, of a Seventh-day Adventist who I came across at one point, who I thought made a lovely point that, isn't it interesting that, I am God, commandment number 1, and then the 10th one deals with envy, that they stand as the two kind of pillars on each side that hold up the rest of the commandments, highlighting the importance of really what you're saying, the risk of feeling envious as you're doing perhaps the greatest mitzvah of all, Ahavat Yisrael. Is that correct?
Yeah. And your point, what I think is also something very important we have to understand, and sometimes it can be a negative sympathy or empathy or destructive empathy. It's not always helpful. Like
in excess.
That's not what we need right now. Right now, what we need is control and help and advice and how to move forward. Right now, it's not the sympathy or empathy that we need. What's going to help us move forward?
Right. I'll tell you, if God forbid you ever need a surgeon, the one quality that you don't really need or necessarily want in them is sympathy or empathy. You don't want them feeling sorry for you. You want a really good, masterful surgeon, not someone who's sitting there identifying with your situation emotionally, right? That's what I meant before by the fact that there are certain professions where it's actually an advantage if you don't have too much of that.
Right. Yeah. So there's times when we want to turn it on, and there's times we want to turn it off, and that is a great balance. Sometimes we want to express it. Sometimes we want to hold it back, because expressing it will actually hurt that person rather than help that person.
I think in another episode, we're going to be talking about how people deal if they are in a relationship in any fashion, with someone who is unable or is not expressing sympathy or empathy. I think that that's the other side of this coin, and I think that that'll be very helpful for a number of different people who find themselves in that situation, which is extremely distressing.
Okay. Well, let's wrap things up. Once again, you're listening to a program, The Rabbi and the Therapist.
Right.
And
if anyone has any questions or comments, something you'd like us to address, and we'll be happy to discuss your question with you. For now, thanks for watching.